Hello everyone and welcome back to our city Lakewood. It's been a little while since we worked on anything other than our industrial area. I think it's been 4 or maybe even 5 episodes. So I thought we should take a short break and work on something different. The plan for today is to do a residential expansion and start transitioning from our high density residential back into low density. If you couldn't already tell from the intro, the area that we're going to be doing our residential expansion is just off the block right here. We put this in quite a while ago now, where we have our courthouse as well as our prison with the park around the outside edge. And as for the zoning, it's mostly high density residential with some offices and high density commercial around the outside edge. And the buildings themselves, while it was zoning in, I went ahead and made some of them historical, and some of these other taller buildings are not historical. So I did that for all 3 of the zone types. We do have a mix of buildings in the area here. And as I mentioned at the beginning in the intro, the plan now is to transition from this high density residential layout back into a low density residential layout. So right now we're going to have a little bit of mix of both high density and low density. It's going to maybe look a little bit similar to what we have over here before we fully transition into low density residential over here. Now, obviously that can't quite happen yet. We still have this temporary industrial area right over here. And of course, since we're taking a break from doing our main industrial area over here, we can't really go too far until all of that gets finished up. So for now, for just a little break from everything, I think we can go a little bit further just along here and see what we can come up with. Now, as for the road layout, I have not gone ahead this time and planned this one out. I'm hoping to try and do this one on the fly and talk a little bit about what my thought process is as I'm going through and designing a road layout, just to give everybody an idea of how I do that. Now there's 2 main things that I'm going to be thinking about while I design this road layout, and that is of course our principles of road hierarchy, as well as the public transportation in the area. As for our principles of road hierarchy, it's not really going to be too complex in the area here. We only have 2 road types. So we have our 4-lane collector roads, and these are the ones that are, well, 4 lanes. They're going along the outside edge right now, as well as we have a couple that go through the middle. And then we also have our 2-lane local roads, and that's basically the bulk of the roads that are going through the area here, and they're connected to all of our 4-lane collector roads. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our 4-lane collector roads are spaced out at a good distance. We want to make sure that the layout of our 2-lane local roads within our 4-lane collector roads it's really kind of up to us. We want to have a decent design that looks kind of cool, I think, without going too overboard. So we may kind of play around with that a little bit, but we'll just kind of see what we can come up with. Now, as for public transportation, it's been a while since I updated the public transportation in the area. I think I did a little bit when I was doing the expansion in the area that we did in the episode where we did our courthouse. So we do have our monorail coming up to over here, and that's really the only public transportation that we have in the area. So this monorail station is connected to our main transport hub over here, and then this main transport hub is of course connected to the rest of the city. So we're not going to be working on our public transportation too much in this video. I think that's going to have to be a dedicated video. Like I said, it hasn't been updated in quite some time. And now that we're getting relatively close to the end of our city, it's about time, I think, that we eventually go back to that and update it for what we have now. So what we want to do, though, at least is kind of think about maybe how we want to lay out our public transportation when we do it. So that we don't have to go back and redo a lot of what we've already done in the area here. So my thought is that I'd like to have another monorail line, maybe down the bottom side over here. We have the one up at the top. We'll probably put another station about right here where my cursor is. Let me put on this, maybe I'll put on the road tool just so you can see where it is a little bit better. We'll probably put another station somewhere over here, probably again in the middle of the next block. And then we'll probably do something about the same just along the other side. Now, as for the other public transportation options, of course, we do have a metro and we do have the tram and all sorts of buses and stuff like that. I kind of stayed away from having too much of a metro in this area. We do have a little bit that's going towards our 3 parks, our triple parks over here, but that's really about it. So I do have the metro on the other side, and that's kind of, I have it separated that way with our metro down at the lower density residential. And then at our high density residential, it's mostly monorail. So I kind of like to stick with that theme. And then of course, we're going to have our airport up at the top over here. So I'm going to wait and see how that airport turns out before I do also too much of the public transportation. I want to make sure everything ties in nice. But for now, public transportation, we really don't have to do too much other than maybe adding a couple stations along here. And that can be done kind of afterwards. We don't really have to delete too much to be able to do that. So for our roads, this city block here, I think it's maybe a little bit small. So we'll probably do something that's a little bit wider than that. So we have our 4-lane collector road right here where my cursor is. And then the next one we have over here is about 3480. So that's the cost of that road segment. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to just go ahead and do that just along the bottom here down to 3480. That would be another equivalent block size over. I want to try and maybe step away from that. I don't think I'm going to continue this middle 4-lane collector road right here. If we go back over here to our low density residential area, we can see that there are fewer of the 4-lane collector roads compared to the 2-lane local roads. And the reason for that is simply just the volume of people who are living in the area. The low density residential area has significantly less people than the high density residential area. With less people in the low density residential area, there are less people that need to be collected at the collector roads, so fewer collector roads are required. Now, since we're transitioning from the high density residential back into low density, as I mentioned, I'm pretty sure we can get away with not having this middle 4-lane collector road. Now we will need something more than just the one here at the bottom, so we'll continue the one along at the top. Not really sure how far we want to go, so I will just bring it out a fair ways. Eventually I'd like to have something maybe at the end here just to close it off, but we'll wait and see what we come up with in the middle with our 2-lane local roads. Now as for our 2-lane local roads, I really don't have anything in particular in mind. Usually when I'm approaching an episode like this, what I'll do is I will just kind of throw something down and see what I can come up with. And if I'm not really sure how it's going to work, I will actually zone the area and I'll play the game for a little while, see how it turns out. And if it seems to be working well, I will go back and take a screenshot, usually a bird's eye view of the road layout, maybe take a few measurements here and there, just so I can reproduce it for a particular episode. But if it doesn't work out, I will just go back to a previous save and try it again. So hopefully we can avoid doing that for this episode, and we can come up with something that's going to work well for our city. I usually like to start by taking a look at what we've already got. I don't think it's going to make too much sense for us to do anything drastically different on the other side. We can slowly transition into something else, but it wouldn't make much sense for us to all of a sudden go to some really curvy roads or anything like that. So we're going to try and stick to this sort of grid-like pattern at least, but maybe mix it up a little bit, but nothing too crazy. So we do have a few of our 2-lane local roads intersecting the 4-lane collector road right here. So we'll probably continue a few of those along at least. And one of those in particular is this one right here that cuts through everything. I like to have at least one, probably a few roads that kind of cross through the whole area. It just makes it easier for our citizens to get to the 4-lane collector roads. You got to think if you were living in the area here and you had to zigzag through all of these 2-lane local roads to try and get to a collector road, that would kind of be unpleasant. So having a road that directly connects to the 4-lane collector road is not such a bad idea. So we'll have at least this one right here. It goes through the entire area. And the next one that's kind of close to that is this one right here. It doesn't go quite as far as the other one, but that's really our second best option. So we'll continue that along as well. So something else we have to also keep in mind for the area here is our pedestrian pathways. So we do have a small one right here. For the new area, we're not going to be going too crazy. We can see that there's really not too many going through the area as it is, unlike our original suburb just over here, where I think I maybe went a little bit overboard with our pedestrian pathways. So we do have pedestrian pathways going behind almost all of the houses in the area here. And although it's not a terrible idea, it's a bit excessive. You can see there's a few people using the pedestrian pathways here. But our 2-lane local roads, 4-lane collector roads, and even our arterial roads, they'll have sidewalks along the outer sides. So having pedestrian pathways is a little bit overkill. And usually what they should be used for is maybe like a shortcut almost. You can think of it that way. So if we look at the neighborhood over here, if somebody wanted to go from the 2-lane local road up at the top over here, and they wanted to go to the intersection here for whatever reason, instead of having to go all the way around the block, now they can just cut through using this pedestrian pathway here. And that's the same with by the hospital just over here. Instead of having to travel along the block, they can cut through and get easier access to the intersection over here. And you can see it's a little bit busier because it has access to the park and the courthouse. So you kind of got to strategically place your pedestrian pathways so that you can provide your citizens a shortcut to wherever they're trying to get to. So we will try and incorporate a few of those into our new suburb, but nothing too crazy like what we had originally in our low density residential area that we came up with right at the beginning of our city. And we'll just go through and we will throw in some random blocks throughout the area, some of these rectangular and square shapes, and just see what we can come up with. Now I'm not going to have a north-south road connected to our east-west 4-lane collector roads quite yet. We do have this 4-lane collector road going north-south. So having a through north-south 2-lane local road in such close proximity, I don't think makes too much sense. But we can have one a little ways away. So why not continue this one over here? And then we can always fill in these gaps and try and come up with something having the direct north-south lane over here. What we want to have maybe is this lane continue along. We don't always have to connect it to our 4-lane collector road at the bottom. We can always have it just shy of that and then have a pedestrian pathway maybe connecting it up just to make sure we have access for our citizens to get over to the intersection over here. And then they can have easy access to our monorail just a little bit down the block. And we'll probably have another monorail station just up here once we start zoning in the area. Now, of course, we can always fill in some of these gaps with just a few other random roads going through the area. So we do have 2 intersections right here. We could put in another one right here, but that would be yet another intersection, pretty close proximity to the other 2. So maybe we'll try and have one in the middle, just over here like that. And then what I think we can maybe do, let's maybe do a curve on the end here, just to break up the square shape that we've got going on so far. And then we'll make sure we put in our pedestrian pathway. I also don't want to interrupt the zoning in the area too much. If we were to have a zone, or pardon me, a pedestrian pathway connected directly to the corner there, we would kind of lose a bunch of zoning in this corner. So we can always come off of the side like this and then connect up. Maybe we'll have a little bit of a Y shape, go through and connect to the other side over here. Like so, and it doesn't have to be straight either. Pedestrian pathways, just like your roads, they can be at a little bit of an angle, gives everything a little bit of a character. Now as for the blocks here, they're not too big, so I don't think having a pedestrian pathway through the middle is really going to help us too much. We can always have a pedestrian pathway going straight through this area right here as it is, and then maybe have something here to give our citizens access to the 4-lane collector road at the bottom from the 2-lane local road network here at the top. And we'll keep this larger rectangular block right here. Maybe what we can do is throw in a pedestrian pathway right near this intersection right here. Just have everything connected up. So anybody along this 2-lane local road up at the top, they can easily go down and connect up to this intersection right here. And then they have options of where they can go and even make their way down to the other corner over here, this intersection of our couple 4-lane collector roads that we have. So let's continue along the other side. We'll put in another intersection right here just to give our citizens a little bit more options for where they can go. We'll split that up and have another relatively large, a little bit thinner rectangular block at the end. And we'll do the same thing over here. We'll just throw in another pedestrian pathway. Like so. And that way, as I said, they can just cut through the area. rather than having to walk the perimeter of this block. So I think it also makes sense for us to throw in some pedestrian pathways up at the top here. We do have a little bit of a gap in our zoning, so we can put a pedestrian pathway just along there. And we'll make sure that our citizens have access to the 4-lane collector roads by throwing in another pedestrian pathway relatively close to the 2 intersections right here with the crosswalk, so our citizens can relatively easily kind of walk into the area there. Now this might change. It's a little bit tricky to be throwing in all these pedestrian pathways and zoning grids and kind of the distance between the roads without knowing what kind of buildings you're going to be putting in. Obviously with zoning it's a little bit more flexible, but with the unique buildings and service buildings, you kind of have to have specific sizes of areas available to them. We may have to make some adjustments as we start filling in the area, but for right now, this is kind of a general idea of what we'd like to have. So we'll have something like that, and this time maybe what we'll do, instead of having a curve down here at the bottom, so we could replicate that and have a curve up here at the top. Let's see if we can maybe have a curve on the inside here instead. So we'll throw in another block just going through the area. And then we'll go through and just change the end of it into a curved road. So we'll have to use our road tool again to make an intersection along here, just so we can, a little bit easier for us to use the bulldozer and delete that road without having to delete the whole segment. So we'll have something like that, just a little bit opposite of what we've already got. And then we'll throw in a couple other blocks through the area. Maybe we'll come right over to here just so that we can bring another road down and connect up. And again, we have our pedestrian pathway at the intersection here, so it's easier access for our citizens to kind of get to where they need to go. I think what we should do, doesn't look really that good, so I think we should go through and change this also into a curved road. And then from here, what we can also do is we can just connect these two together with a pedestrian pathway that our citizens can, if they need to, go between the two areas relatively easily. Oh, that's a little bit messy. Let's see if we can do something different. Hoping to have these connected together. So we should maybe put a pedestrian pathway along the outside edge of a park that we have here. Of course, we could always move this park, and that might be something that we end up doing. But for right now, we'll try and stick with what we've got. And the weird thing about pedestrian pathways is you don't have to connect them directly. If you get close enough, they usually connect themselves. So, for example, if we go to right here and we try and use the snap tool to connect everything together, it's going to delete this segment of our pedestrian pathway right here. So if we turn off our snapping tools and we just bring it as close as we can and then put it down, it'll connect up for us. So that's a little bit of a trick that you can use if you're having any issues with your pedestrian pathways. We'll connect also to this corner here. We don't have any zoning grids, so we're not losing anything by connecting this together. And we'll also put in a few of these pedestrian pathways again, just to cross everything and connect it all up. There, I think that's looking pretty cool as it is. And we should continue just along the other side here. So I don't want to go too crazy. I think maybe this will be the end of our residential area that we're making. I think that kind of makes sense. We don't want to fill in anything too quick now. So we'll put in our 4-lane collector road just at the end here, like so. Bring that all the way up. And we can delete this extra segment. Actually, I'm gonna put in a little bit more here. I don't really like if you do the 90-degree corner here with the 4-lane collector road. I don't really like how the roads turn out. You can see this road at the bottom. It does become a little bit distorted. I don't really like that. So we'll just continue along and put a full intersection in the area. Most cars will probably just use this as a route to turn around if they need to, but it's not going to really cause too much of a traffic issue for us right now. We may end up doing something over here, or probably what we should do is turn this into a bit of a curve rather than a 90-degree angle, but we'll leave it there for now because I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do in the area. So just leave it as it is. And we'll go through and we will continue our 2-lane local road network. So we do have this one going east-west connected to our 4-lane collector roads on either side. So we'll make sure we want to continue this one along as well. We do have the one 2-lane local road going up and down here through the area. So I think we should probably have another one. I did talk about having a couple. So we do have the 2 going east-west. So I think it makes sense for us to have, oops, I turned that off rather than emptying it out. Let's do that again. There we go. So it makes sense for us to have 2 going north-south as well, I think. But again, we don't want to get too close to our 4-lane collector road just on the other side over here. So we'll maybe try and do something just in the middle between the 2. See if we can get something exactly in the middle. If I can do my math, 960, I think, would be right in the middle of that. Right there would be good. Straight up and down. That's a little bit close maybe, but it's gonna have to do because we've already filled in the other side over here. So we'll just kind of have to live with what we've got. And then we'll fill in what we can. So we maybe want to have blocks that are a little bit bigger now. So we are transitioning, as I said, from the high density residential into the low density residential. So if we want to try and stick with something at least somewhat similar to over here, maybe not quite like this, but maybe blocks that are a little bit bigger than within the high density residential, just to try and fit the theme if we can. So we'll kind of come along with another road just through here. Like so. Maybe connect this up. So this will be a road that's almost going through. It is going parallel, but not quite connected to the east-west 4-lane collector roads. Just so we can give our citizens a decent a distance to be able to drive without having to do any zigzagging. So we can do the same thing with these ones going through the area like this. Just kind of connect that up, and so now we're starting to transition back into more of the rectangular shapes. So let's throw in a couple more roads through here, try and break that up a little bit. Throw in one right there. We'll put one right there just to have something a little bit different. And you can see I don't have these quite lined up, which is okay. Maybe what we'll do instead is we will connect them up. See what we can do. Maybe we'll do have a short one here and then connect them up like that. Guess that's not too terrible. Yeah, why not? Just have something completely different. You know, if you ever look at a map of a city, you're driving through, you got your GPS going, nothing's really perfect. I mean, they try and do some kind of grid-like pattern usually, at least where I live. It's very grid-like, but they do have kind of weird roads every once in a while. So let's throw that in there. We're losing a little bit of space on our zoning, but that's not the end of the world. We'll throw in a few trees or something like that in the area just to fill it in. Same with right here. We're losing some zoning, but some trees will cover that up. A nice pedestrian pathway maybe. I think, you know what, for the most part, this is looking pretty well filled in. We do have a bit of a gap here. We can always also, we don't have to connect them together. We can usually get away with something very similar to that. Kind of have a cul-de-sac at the end. That doesn't have to connect together, just to have something a little bit different. Maybe we'll put in a couple of those just to see if we can fill in some of the zoning that we are missing. And we can also even do that right at the corner here. Let's see how that's going to turn out. We'll put in something like this. I'll do some zoning around that, and we'll have pedestrian pathway just to finish off the connection. Like that, and we'll throw in a few more pedestrian pathways through here. So I think for the most part, everything is looking pretty good. I just had a quick look, see if I could try and think if I needed to do anything really drastic, any big changes. Most of what we're going to just finish up with is some more pedestrian pathway connections. Just want to make sure we have accessibility for our citizens to pretty much go anywhere that they might need to go. Maybe putting one right in here will help. And we can also do the trick with our 2-lane local roads by switching it up to the different type. So instead of having just the standard 2-lane road, if we throw in a 2-lane road with trees, we will put in some crosswalks in there so that we can have our citizens able to cross the road without having to go to the intersection at the far side. Now I think for now that's looking pretty good. We'll go down and we'll add a little bit more onto the 4-lane collector road at the bottom just to put in an actual intersection so we can avoid having the distorted corners. And while we're planning out the road network for this area, I think it would make sense for us to also fill in this little gap right here in between our residential area and the regional highway. Unfortunately, I do tend to have a habit of leaving those areas. They can be a little bit harder to plan a road network for. Some of these weird shapes. So, for example, right here, where our 6-lane arterial road comes into the city, there's not really much going on in these areas. I do have another little section over here. I did throw in a metro monorail train hub and this random park, but there's not really much going on. Obviously, this is maybe a little bit small, but you kind of get the idea. There's these kind of weird ends of some of the residential areas that don't really make too much sense. So I think it would be a good idea for us to try and come up with something. And I do every once in a while, I when I'm trying to think of what I can do for a particular episode, I'll just play the city for a little while and try to do random stuff and fill in areas and see if I can come up with an idea. But we do tend to eventually start having some traffic issues with this 4-lane collector road down here at the bottom. The only way to get out of this area right here is along that 4-lane collector road, and then coming up into the area over here is through this tunnel right here, this tunnel that goes underneath the highway. So having more connections, I think, from this area that we're eventually going to be developing into the industrial area, into this area here, without having to go through and focus and concentrate everything on the intersections that are here, giving our citizens more options to come through the area is a good idea. So we should probably continue our 4-lane collector roads just a little bit further. And then we'll transition into some overpasses, I think, and go over the regional highway. This is just tentative for now. I'm not going to connect anything up. I want to kind of see what we can come up with, and then also see what we can come up with for our industrial area. Eventually, we might not need some of these overpasses, but it's going to be easier for us to work with them in right now, at least temporarily, rather than having to redevelop an area to try and put them in afterwards. So if we have to take them out, it's not going to be the end of the world, but I think putting them in right now is not a terrible idea. So I want to try and get these two even. So I'm going to draw a road between the two. They're already matched up, so I didn't really need that. So I'm going to come up from here. Kind of forget how much I did already, so we'll just draw another section right on top. A cost of 1540. So we'll do the same thing over here. Cost of 1540. There we go. So we'll just leave that in, as I said, temporarily for now, until we can come up with something maybe in the future. Once we've figured out what we want to do over here, that will give our truck traffic, our citizens, a number of options to go between our residential area over here and our industrial area across the regional highway. Now as for two-lane local roads here, we don't have a ton of room. This area actually right over here, this corner, I think this might be not a bad idea for kind of some of our utility buildings. So things like our parks maintenance building, our road maintenance building, maybe our waste transfer complex. Kind of in here, it doesn't really work well for any residential buildings or, well, commercial buildings might be okay, but I wouldn't want to put any residential buildings here. We do have these ones here, I guess, across the highway, but it does get kind of noisy with noise pollution, and we don't want to have any sick citizens. So something in here, some kind of utility area for this residential block, I think would make sense. So we'll maybe leave that somewhat open for now. And we will connect to the two-lane local roads that we already have in the area. So we talked about through roads last time, and taking a look, doesn't look like we really have too much going north-south through the area right here. This one is probably the closest one that goes north-south. So we will just extend that one here. And we'll connect these two together. I don't think I'm going to bring this one through. Kind of make sure we don't have too many roads coming into our 4-lane collector road. I think that'll be more than enough for what we have. And it might be kind of cool to have a road going underneath of our 4-lane collector roads overpasses. So we'll do something like this. I don't think I'm going to zone any residential on the side of our 2-lane collector, or pardon me, our 2-lane local roads that are closest to our regional highway. We were talking about the noise pollution before. I do have the noise barriers on our highway, but still, I think just putting some trees in that area will be better than having some residential buildings. I'd like to have another option for our citizens to get across the 4-lane collector road here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect it up to the intersection that's right here, just at the kind of the beginning of the slope going up to the overpass. We do have the road up at the far side, but I think adding in something else might work as well. I'm going to smooth out this corner as well. Okay, so as I said, this will probably be our utility area, and planning it out for particular buildings. Kind of have to wait and see. We'll throw in some of these buildings and see what we come up with. I think having something like this will work well. We can probably fit a number of the parks maintenance buildings. Let's just take a look at that right now. We can see that we need more. Most of our parks, maybe about 50% of our parks are not boosted. So I think we can have at least one more of the parks maintenance buildings. Looks like we only have 2 just on the far side over here. So I think having at least two just across the way will work well. It'll be able to service all the parks in our new residential area, plus probably a whole bunch in the high density residential area here. We should honestly probably put some in the low density residential area across the river, but we'll get to that when we put in the buildings over here. And we can also take a look at our road maintenance buildings. If I can find that menu. We can see also for this one, we do have quite a few more of these road maintenance buildings than we do the park maintenance buildings. And for the most part, our city is looking pretty good. But this new area, again, doesn't really have much. So I think throwing in at least one or two of those will help our city. And then garbage. We have no waste transfer buildings in the new area and really not much in the high density residential here. So putting in some will help our city quite a bit. Going along the edge of our highway here, we're going to have to start throwing in some curves just to make sure that we don't intersect our regional highway. Of course, that would be a very big violation of our principles of road hierarchy to have our 2-lane local roads connected to the regional highway. So we are definitely not going to do that. Yeah, that curve's not too bad, I don't think. We'll leave this gap here. If I lose a little bit of zoning near the highway, I'm not using it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Maybe we'll smooth out this corner over here. If we want to have a nice corner, we want to make sure we also have the same distance between. That's 480 and this is only 200. So we'll go 280 across just so we can have a nice corner, 200 units each. Smooth that out. I think that looks pretty good. It looks kind of interesting. Has a little bit of a similar shape to what we have down here. But the blocks are a little bit bigger than what we have down here. So maybe we can have some more low density residential compared to high density residential. But we'll throw in some pedestrian pathways still for sure. Make sure everything is nice and connected. So I was talking about shortcuts before. Bigger blocks like this, having a pedestrian pathway between them just to connect everything together, give everybody a shortcut that they can use if needed. And connecting to the corner here, it looks like the zoning is already a little bit messed up. So having it connected directly to the corner, we're not going to lose too much more zoning than what we've already lost given the angle that we have our roads. Connect this down over here. Okay, I think this is going to be our road layout for this new area. Looking at the time that I've been spending recording, and it looks like we're coming pretty close to almost 40 minutes, I think, for this episode. So what we'll probably do is we will leave it here for now. And then next episode, we will go through zoning, and we'll talk about going through zoning and how I like to zone an area, time spent waiting for buildings to level up before zoning a new area, picking service buildings and parks and stuff like that, and just kind of going through and filling in the area next episode. Thank you all very much for spending your time with me for yet another episode of City Skylines in our city Lakewood. I hope I didn't ramble too much, and everyone got a glimpse of what I do to try and plan out a new area. Don't hesitate to let me know what you thought of this episode with a like, dislike, or a comment down below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already for some more City Skylines content in the future, and I'll see everyone for the next episode.